What's up, Bombshells? Welcome to Bombshell 1111 Podcast, Therapy for Women of Color. My name is Kia, and I'm your host. Generally, podcasts request donations, but I want you to show love by simply subscribing to my social media platforms by visiting my website at www.bombshell1111podcast.com. I want to see thousands of subscribers on this platform. Leave your comments and I'll show love by shouting you out on my social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook. I want to thank you for your continued support as always. And with that being said, let's jump into this new episode.
Hi, I'm Dr. Supatra Tovar, and I'm here to drop some bombs on the Bombshell 1111.
Welcome back, you guys, to Bombshell 1111 Podcast. I'm Kia, and I'm your host. Tonight, we'll be talking about trauma with my special guest, my special returning guest, Dr. Tovar. So let's get right into it, Bombshells. Welcome back, Dr. Tovar. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
You're so more than welcome. I loved you, right from the beginning on our first episode, and you specialize in so many different areas, and I just wanted to kind of like break some down individually that I think that the audience, just from feedback, would be interested in, and I know you have some good knowledge and tools to share with us as well.
Great.
So let's jump in. So for the people that missed our first episode, you guys go back and check that out as well. But for those that didn't get to tune in on that episode, can you just give the audience a short bio, short description on who you are, what you do, and where you're from, Dr. Tovar?
Absolutely. I am one of the world's only clinical psychologists who's also a registered dietitian and fitness expert. And, I made it my mission to have as, well-rounded education as possible to be able to treat people in a holistic way. And what I mean by holistic way is that I focus and concentrate on treating people, variety of, mental illnesses and physical ailments, but from mental, like a mind, body, and spirit perspective. So I wanted to make sure that my education reflected that. I come from Colorado, and so being a part of the health and wellness community has always been really important to me.
And I know just from reading your bio as well, Dr. Tovar, you also specialize in holistic mind-body treatment. Can you explain it more and let us know exactly what that is?
Right. So I think having the education of being a clinical psychologist, a registered dietitian, and fitness expert means that I can treat somebody in a mind, body, and spirit holistic manner, meaning the clinical psychologist in me is able to help treat any kind of mental disorder that you might be suffering from, as well as, as a registered dietitian, I can look at somebody's diet, somebody's lifestyle, and be able to see how that's also affecting your mental health as well as your physical health. And being a fitness expert, I can help guide somebody to a higher level of physical wellness with what I know from being a Pilates instructor. So I use all of those designations in my education to help somebody be treated in a very individualized manner. So whatever they're coming to me for, I feel like I have the education and the training to be able to help them in all of those areas of functioning.
And Dr. Tovar, how has holistic mind-body treatment been proven to be effective as relating to treating trauma?
Well, specifically with trauma, it's really important that you are looking at all of the aspects of your mental health as well as your physical health, because trauma, in and of itself, witnessing or being subjected to a traumatic experience not only affects you mentally and cognitively. You know that, you've witnessed this, so your mind and your brain is housing the trauma, but the trauma is also housed in your body. And so being able to treat somebody, effectively in trauma requires you not only to help somebody process the trauma on a cognitive level, but you're also wanting to help them expel the trauma that's being housed in their body and help them to learn how to regulate their stress response, most importantly, so that they can recover from the trauma on all levels.
So, Dr. Tovar, before we move forward with the rest of the questions for tonight's episode, for those individuals who don't understand or have a clear definition or clinical definition of trauma, can you explain exactly what trauma is?
Absolutely. Trauma is commonly defined as an emotional response to a very terrible event, like an accident or a rape, or you witness the horrors of war or a natural disaster. And most commonly after the event, your emotional responses tend to be shock and denial, because what you've witnessed or you've been subject to is so distressing that the mind often and the body often shuts down. It cannot handle the event.
And so, Dr. Tovar, what is the difference between PTSD and trauma? Is it similar or pretty much the same?
Well, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So just like with that name, it's what happens after the trauma. And as I said before, the most common emotional response to trauma is shock and denial. And the reason why PTSD develops is because of that shock and denial. The term is when somebody is avoiding the memory of the event. That's usually what will be the beginning and the start of post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of the kind of hallmark emotional and cognitive responses that comes from PTSD are like unpredictable emotions, flashbacks. You can have strained relationships, physical symptoms like headaches and nausea. And you have to kind of fall into a set of symptoms for you to be clinically diagnosed with PTSD. So the trauma happens first, and because of the shock and the denial and the avoidance, PTSD comes later.
And you kind of definitely went into my next question. What are some signs or like reactions for an individual to recognize that someone is suffering from some form of trauma?
Well, there's a few criteria that you have to fall into, and you have to have at least one of these symptoms in each of these categories, with the exception of this other one where you have to have two. But I'll go through them so that you understand what kind of symptoms can come up. Usually there's some kind of intrusion symptom, which can be like, the memory coming into your mind unwanted, or nightmares or flashbacks, or some emotional distress, or kind of physical reactivity to these traumatic reminders, or what are more commonly known as triggers. So say you get into the car and you've had a horrible car accident. The moment another car even kind of comes near you, you might have this physical, freeze, or your body, just completely tenses up because you're kind of predicting another impact, and that's based off of the memory of your car crash. The next is avoidance, like I said, and avoidance is really what keeps PTSD persisting, and that's where you just really don't want to think about, the event. You don't want to feel the feelings, so you shut down, and you avoid those memories. The next one is negative alterations in cognitions and mood. And so that can be, completely forgetting about the actual traumatic event, like we kind of dissociated from it. Negative thoughts or feelings. You can have a negative affect or the facial expression. Decreased interest in any kinds of activities. You can experience isolation. And have overly kind of negative thoughts about yourself or the world. And finally, there's differentiation or alterations in your arousal and reactivity. So you can be really, really irritable or aggressive, or you can engage in super risky or destructive behavior. You can be hypervigilant. You can have like a heightened startle reaction. You can have trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping. So those are the kind of major symptoms that you would feel, and you have to be feeling those and having those symptoms for about a month to be diagnosed with PTSD. However, there's also chronic PTSD, which is not an officially recognized disorder in the DSM, and that's, but it's a commonly accepted diagnosis among trauma practitioners, and that's usually when you see somebody who's come from a really abusive childhood or has experienced long-term abuse or witnessed traumatic events over long term, like someone who may have grown up in Afghanistan and seen just horrific violence over 20-year period of time. They are classified as having chronic PTSD, which is just trauma after trauma, and housing that and experiencing that both mentally and physically.
What are some effective ways to deal with trauma?
Well, there's a bunch of different types of evidence-based treatments, and one of the most common ones is exposure and response prevention. And so, like I said, one of the major things that keeps trauma persisting for a person is the avoidance of that trauma. And like the name, exposure and response prevention indicates, you are, in a very safe and therapeutic environment, facing your trauma. So you might be telling it in a story, or you might be recalling your trauma, and then the person who's trained to help and treat you is helping you assess what your distress level is in telling the story, and then they'll take you through a series of kind of somatic relaxation or body relaxation exercises, helping you to seek and find safety in this safe space of therapy. And you'll go through that over a series and period of time until you're able to tell your traumatic story with very little or no distress at all, and you're able to calm yourself and regulate yourself. And what's happening in your mind is you're taking that traumatic experience from an emotionally reactive part of your brain, like it's housed and centered through your limbic system, more commonly through your amygdala, which makes you very, emotionally reactive. And it takes it to a different part of your brain where you don't have that same emotion tied. It just turns into a memory, an unpleasant memory, but nothing that has, caused you the same amount of stress and distress as it was before you processed through it.
Now, you just covered treatments for trauma, and I'm pretty sure the listening audience wants to know what the answer to the bigger question is: does trauma ever go away?
I don't think your memory of the traumatic event will ever go away unless you're, not not being treated, and you've dissociated from it, meaning you kind of have divorced your mind from the traumatic event. But even if you're experiencing dissociation, it doesn't even necessarily go away. It might pop out at times when you don't really expect it to. So the best thing that you can do is face that trauma. And when you do, and you put it into that less emotionally reactive part of your brain, you may, down the line through time, think about what happened to you, but it's not as if you are reliving it in the same way. But I don't think you can ever say, oh, I'm free necessarily from the trauma. You can say, I experienced this, I got treatment for this, and it no longer hampers and impedes my functioning in life.
That is a great segue into my last question. When a person starts to experience the trauma, what can they expect as it relates to improvement through treatment?
Well, if they've experienced trauma and they can find help right away, that's the number one best thing that you can do. Like I said, the therapist will use some evidence-based treatment for trauma, such as exposure and response treatment. There's also trauma-focused CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, most commonly used with children. Yeah. And there's also EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. I forget the R part, but basically it's an exposure type of treatment where you are using kind of rapid eye movements to find where the trauma is essentially housed in the brain in order to release it and to have it be put into the less emotionally reactive part of the brain. I'm not trained in that, obviously, if I can't even remember what the R stands for, but I am trained in exposure and CBT. Anyway, what you would see after time and in any of those treatments is that your subjective feelings of distress will tend to go down more and more with treatment. And over time, you will basically, remember that event as just kind of another memory that you have, an unpleasant memory. And then you'll be able to move forward in your life. And I've seen, so many children to adults go through this kind of treatment with me, and also, read about it and studied so much about it that it is possible to go through something horrific but come out the other side resilient and strong and capable after treatment.
Dr. Tovar, is there anything you feel that I missed on the topic trauma that you'd like to share with the listening audience?
It's nothing that you missed, but I do have, kind of my go-to saying when it comes to treating trauma. And, my go-to saying is the only way out is through. You have to go through the event. You have to, be able to remember what happened to you for you to be able to move forward. And if you can do that and bravely face what you went through and be vulnerable enough with a therapist, you can heal. It is absolutely possible. And, you just want to find the person that can compassionately and empathetically guide you through something like that.
And speaking of finding the right person, Dr. Tovar, how can a listening audience get connected to you if they want to seek out your therapy services?
Absolutely. I'm licensed in California, so if you're in California, you can always contact me. I do have a website. It's www.drsupatratovar.com, all one word. I'm sure you'll probably put that in your little description below as well. Mm-hmm. On that, you can also find all of my social media. I'm very active on social media, posting every day reflections on what I'm learning from my clients in treatment, or, I'm often a kind of a featured expert in articles and things like that. You can find all of that on my website or through my social media, and just keep up with what I am putting out there into the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tovar, and thank you so much for coming on again and being a part of the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so glad. And I love your podcast, and I love coming on. So if you ever need me again, I'm here.
Oh, I'm going to reach back out once again. we definitely have several topics that we can discuss because you're so knowledgeable. That's why I love having you here. I love it.
Thank you so much, Kia.
You're more than welcome. And so, you guys, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks again to my favorite guest, Dr. Tovar, for coming and joining us. We hope that you guys were able to hear something that was beneficial to you. Thanks so much for listening. And always remember, you are a bomb within your own shell. Peace, love, and light, you guys. Until next time, good night. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure you subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Rate, review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you're leaving with some valuable information that can help you on your personal journey. Also, check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Bombshell1111 or at Bombshell1111 TV. You can also check out our mental health page, Your Health is Your Wealth, on Facebook, which is a page created to inform and support individuals with mental health and other health conditions. And with that being said, always remember, you guys, you are a bomb within your own shell. And until next time, peace, love, and light.